welcome to my podcast. I do feel like I'm in the presence of a superstar only because you are a woman, you're a mom, you are a lawyer, you're a collaborator, you're a producer, you are a negotiator, a consultant, and
Shoot, 2/3 of I feel like this is a reverse compliment.
I tend to take on a lot of roles. I think women, we don't really ask for what we deserve.
I agree. And I would also say it's hard to blame the women. I had a friend this year ask, and very politely, very respectfully, and they withdrew the offer.
Oh, wow. And that's like our nightmare, right?
It's always a possibility in a negotiation. And
Yeah.
whether it's a marketplace or a higher level corporate negotiation, that the other person will leave. And you have to be willing to face that responsibility. As long as you conduct yourself in a manner that you're proud of, you have to be willing to take that risk. But that's why women don't do it, because they're less willing to take that risk than men are. Because I think as a general matter, they feel less entitled to whatever it is they're asking for. Even if they're 1000% over entitled to it, they still feel less entitled than a man would. And so as a result, they don't feel like they should risk it. You know what I mean?
I wish I booked this podcast for 2 hours instead of 1 hour, because I feel like I can learn so much from you. As a kid, I did grow up with a lot of Persians. And during that time, a lot of Persians came over, and my exposure was actually to realize the persecution that they faced. And I got to learn about that and how much they sacrificed, right? Can you share with us your experience with that and how your family emigrated to Canada and how that inspired you to write the books that you do and do what you're doing now?
Yeah, and it's not just Iranians, right? It's people all over the world. But there is something to be said about living under an oppressive regime, and an oppressive regime that has just undergone a revolution, and an oppressive regime that has just undergone a revolution that also finds itself in the midst of a bloody war. So I was born in 77. The revolution occurred in 79. And obviously the 2 years leading up to the revolution were extremely volatile and bloody as well. And then the first 10 years following the revolution were an extremely unstable time for the regime as it was trying to strengthen its hold on the people. So it was also a very aggressive time to be living under that regime. It still is, and I certainly don't deny that. But it was a particularly difficult situation at that time, and the laws were far more strict in a lot of ways than they are now. And then there was the Iran-Iraq War, which about 1 million people died. There was about 40 million people in Iran at the time. So that's about 1 out of every 40 people died, and a lot of heavy rocket attacks into Tehran. By the time I left in 88, there was up to 6 missile attacks a day. So it wasn't just the oppressive government. It was also the bread lines and the electricity cutoffs and the rations and the lack of fruit and things like that. But as a general matter, I was actually just talking about this with someone today. I feel when I reflect on my childhood, my overwhelming sense is not suffering. My overwhelming memory and feeling, even the smells and the touches and the sights I remember, it is mostly this idea of being cocooned in almost a shelter that existed in my mind, but a shelter that was missile-proof. And I went through my childhood in this shelter a lot, in this mental shelter. And a lot of the reason, and I'm aware, it's fully clear, so I can see exactly what's happening all around me. I can smell it, I can see it, I can touch it, I can taste it. I can feel it. And yet, by the time morning rolls around, my sphere is back. And this protective layer that I had around me was largely because of my parents and the way they were protecting me, not from the truth. And this is really important. They weren't protecting me from the truth, but they were protecting me from trauma. And that is when I learned really at that age, the lesson that became my life's work, which is now this new book, Stoic Empathy, which is how do you utilize your empathic awareness of the people around you in order to find sufficient self-control, not so you can hide the truth, but so that you can expose it in a manner that would be appropriate for the people around you, especially if they're more vulnerable than you, for them, as appropriate as exposing children to war and oppression can be, right? Obviously, these are things we don't want kids to have firsthand experience with, but if they're having the firsthand experience, how do we act as that buffer? And they did such a great job of this. And I don't think they knew what they were doing. You're just good at it naturally. And I ended up being very driven by their protection of me. And then we had the gift of immigration, which tons of warts on the side of the world, man. Boy, especially when I entered the corporate world, there's so many external power dynamics, so much inequality. It doesn't compare. I would much rather be here than be back home. And it's not because of the food, which is amazing, or the people who are incredible, or the archaeology or the landscape. It's because of the regime. And a lot of Iranians feel this way. And so the reality is that I became like this driven person, driven to succeed, driven to prove my parents' sacrifice was worth it, right? Not anything they imposed on me, but something I imposed on myself. And it really changed the way I actually approach the world, so that I became intrigued by this idea of power dynamics and how much of our power is within us and how much of our power is not within us, right? And finding my way through that labyrinth, essentially.
How did you formulate these ideas? Was it as a child, or was it when you formally entered law school, where you realized that you had this ability to use your background, your experiences as an immigrant to this country to create these ideas and then ultimately to write the books that you've written?
So partly I realized it through error, right? And through failure. And it was this, when we first immigrated, for example, I was suddenly exposed not only to a new language, but a new room, right? That I had to read, a new way of existing, a new form of dress, a new way of being. And I did not know how to maneuver my way through it. And it was disastrous. My first 2 years after immigration, I was just a middle school kid, but I was eating lunch alone every day. And I have middle school students right now, and I can't imagine if they had to eat lunch alone every day. That's a kind of a trauma of its own, right? That is an experience for a child that is extremely difficult, but it's because I didn't know how to maneuver my way through it. So I learned from my loneliness. I learned from my failure. And at the same time, every day I went home to a family who embraced me, to a belly that was full. We never had a lot growing up, but my mom made sure we never went hungry, and we always had books in the house. And those two things together were my comfort. So I was one of those teenagers who looked forward to going home because home was my safe space. And then as I got older, I realized not everybody has that. Home is not their safe space. And so I started to imagine what it must be like for them to be in that fight, flight, or freeze response, or to be in that kind of disassociated state of loneliness when they're home with their family, when they're supposed to be in the comfort of people who love them. My family, we're Persian. We yell, we shout, we get into fights. I'm not saying it's like this perfect little Eden, but we love the heck out of each other. And that was when I started to appreciate the impact of the gifts that my family had given me. And then as I got older, I began advocacy. So I started debating in high school. In university, I studied neuropsychology and philosophy. So essentially the study of human nature, the study of argument, the study of logic. How do you convince someone to come around to your way of thinking? And because of the combination of the neuropsych and the philosophy, which is logic argument, I knew that logic argument wasn't enough. There needs to be this real human connection. And so I became really interested in this idea of, okay, now I'm in this world. I want to prove my parents right. I want to succeed. And I don't come with the things. I don't come with the power. When I went to law school, I had never been inside a boardroom. I had never been inside a courtroom. I had never even been inside an office building. I had never been inside an office building. I'd certainly never been inside the offices of lawyers or anything like that. I had no familiarity or experience with it. And I recognized that. And I didn't want to fall flat on my face like I did in middle school. And obviously, I'm a different person then. I have language, I have power, I have education. I've been in this country for a long time. But it's not that different. You come out, you're a female minority, you're younger than everyone else, and you don't come with any of the power connections. So you don't really have an understanding of this, the way the heart of this world beats. And I knew that I had to understand it. And I also had to understand my juries. I had to understand my judges. I had to understand my opposing counsel, my client, my research vendor, my document copy guy. I had an experience one time where early on in my career where I behaved towards a paralegal as if I was superior to them. Big mistake, huge mistake, huge fallout. This paralegal was not my fan for the longest period of time. And eventually I came to see not only how highly skilled she is and irreplaceable, certainly can't be replaced by me, but also, man, that's just bad strategy. That is not how you get things done. Of course, you need to be authoritative if you're leading a team and tell people what to do, but you need to direct them in a manner that is respectful of their role in the team. And since that time, I have never, ever partnered with anyone who's been disrespectful to anyone based on their profession on the corporate ladder. So that was how it's transformed. So it built on itself like everything else does, right? Brick by brick. I ended up practicing for 17 years, and with time, with mentorship, with experience, became quite adept and skilled. In the meantime, I'm able to reflect back, think back. How was it when I was a child? What was I learning in university? What were these Stoics talking about? Is this the same thing? I began an exposure and a training in Buddhism, and then I started to compare and contrast Buddhism, Sufi Islam, and Stoicism, the Japanese samurai warriors. And it's just seeing this compare and contrast between these various ways of being, these various philosophies, all of which focus on the ability to exercise emotive control over ourselves. In the meantime, I'm under intense pressure and I'm leading teams, right? And I'm trying to have kids and I'm trying to write my books. And again, falling down and getting up, falling down and getting up until I can get as close to nailing this kind of skill set as I can and essentially earning my freedom from the corporate world.
Gave me a clue there as to why and is your book out, Stoic Empathy, out, or is it still due to be released?
It's being released April 8th.
April 8th. So it gave me, what you just said gave me a little clue as to why you titled your book Stoic Empathy. But tell the listeners about what your book is about, and how do you think that your book can help women professionals?
Okay. One of the things that always fascinated me as I was getting ahead in the corporate world was I was using my awareness of the people around me, my essential empathic awareness of the people around me in order to succeed. I wasn't using force. I wasn't yelling, shouting, screaming, slamming the table. Plenty of people do. It wouldn't have been authentic to me. If I did get away with it, I don't think I would have been able to go into sleep at night. I just wouldn't have felt good about that type of power grab. I don't feel comfortable with that. But I feel comfortable influencing people through a servant leadership that's mutually benefiting for everyone once I understand them. And then, let's be honest, it's the corporate world. I also feel comfortable pinpointing who I don't trust and making sure that I maintain my emotional distance from those individuals while still understanding them. So I began to develop this idea of empathy, which is not really mine, actually. It's the neuropsychology idea of empathy, which divides it into two sections. The first section is what we'll call cognitive empathy, and the second section is what we'll call emotive empathy or emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is what we typically associate with empathy, especially as we feminize the concept, right? Your pain in my heart, right? I'm watching my favorite TV show. My favorite character is finally in a good and happy place, and they get in a car and a text message comes through and they look down and they swerve and they're T-boned, and I recoil. Even though the glass of the window isn't shattering my skin, but their pain translates into pain in me. And then, of course, that's a fictional character on a screen in my television. Imagine if it's your child or your mother or your brother, right? That's emotional empathy, your pain in my heart. This cognitive empathy is, listen, I'm not going to walk a mile in your shoes for a variety of reasons, but I am going to sync my steps to yours. And I'm going to see and I'm going to hear what you hear, because I need to understand the way you experience the world around you, because I can use that not just to serve me, but to serve you. An example of cognitive empathy I like to use is my sister. She works in a refugee camp. She works for UNHCR. And actually, they lost 60% of their staff yesterday. If she were to allow the trauma that surrounds her on a daily basis to traumatize her, she would be disabled from doing her job. She would no longer be able to effectively serve the population. And it's her job to serve them, right? She's somebody that they have and they don't have a lot. And then she also has to lead that team, right? So she has to manage her own emotions in order to serve this population. Now, one of the things I talk about in one of my TEDx talks was an example of managing your emotions to serve yourself. This is a story of me and my mom on the streets of Tehran. I was caught without my headscarf. There was a morality police guard. There was a really big gun. There was threats. There was hostility. It was a challenging situation and extremely difficult. My mom was not interested in serving the morality police guard. My mom was interested in helping me. And so her ability to connect with that guard, to use empathy to connect with that guard on a cognitive level while maintaining emotional distance, that was in some ways, obviously intended to imper her influence in a forward fashion that assisted her and her own family. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? She's fully entitled to use whatever defenses she has as essentially a powerless, gunless, weaponless, unarmed woman, right, in the streets of Iran when faced in that situation. And here we have this cognitive empathy, emotional empathy. Not really binary, right? It's actually a spectrum. There's a million different in-betweens, right? And what I try to teach people is, how can you be intentional? How can you be strategic about the type of empathy you employ? If it's a long-term relationship, someone very close to you, somebody with whom you want to find vulnerability, versus you are a surgeon in an ER, or you're in a hostile takeover situation of your corporation, right? This skill can translate into this skill that so many women have that is so often marked as weak or lesser than, or something that allows you to give something up. As long as you can be strategic about where you are on the spectrum, that's the missing element, is this strategy and then the ability to actually effectuate this strategy, right? How do you maintain empathy while maintaining emotional regulation and distance to the extent that's appropriate? And maybe you're not all the way here. In fact, probably nobody ever is unless they're a psychopath. But you're maybe somewhere along here, or somewhere along here, or somewhere along here. Very different. Sometimes in a conversation, you start out here and you realize, uh-oh, this has happened before. And sometimes in a relationship, you start out here. And over time, you're able to get here, right? So this is a fluid thing. It's moving. The thing that allows you to control this spectrum is Stoicism. It is essentially the ancient version of modern emotional regulation. The idea that there are external power dynamics. They are impacting my ability to exercise my rights. And yet, there is always a space between stimuli and response. And I am that space. The external power dynamics exist, as do I. And my power might fluctuate from situation to situation. There are certain components of power that are 100% in my control. What I think about things, how I judge things, right? To a large extent, how I feel things, not instinctual feelings, but how we cognitively evaluate and feel things, right? These things are in my control. So you could be in a concentration camp, and it's not because you didn't manifest a better destiny for yourself, right? It's not because you could have done things differently or exercised greater willpower. It's because there are external power dynamics that are outside of your control. But if you're Viktor Frankl in that camp, you keep a free mind. And it's an extraordinary thing to be able to do that nobody can ever take from you. POWs talk about this. Trauma victims who have healed and regained their sense of self talk about this power. And sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes it's darn near impossible. But at the end of the day, this is your humanity. This is what you have. And it's really incredible. And so I feel incredibly passionate about teaching people the tools that they need to regulate themselves, but also teaching them about this strategy of, how do I come in here? How do I come in there? How do I know which is which? What are the signs? If I'm all the way here, what type of empathy tools do I utilize? Because listen, especially as a woman, I'm already pretty darn good at this part. I'm pretty darn good at the emotional empathy part. I need to get better at this part. but I'm already way ahead of people who don't come into a room and read it, because coming into a room and reading it is power. And all I'm doing is I'm helping you strategize through the use of that power and control it a little bit more. It's almost like women are going around being these superheroes with powers that they can't control. I don't know if you're a fan of the Marvel films or not, but my favorite superhero movies are always like the coming of age superhero movie where, you know, they're discovering their powers, but they don't know how to control them. And I feel like a lot of the people I work with are like that. They're discovering their powers and they just need some coaching on how to control them. And that's my job. And that's what I hope the book will do.
So if you feel comfortable during your time at Barack Ferrazzano, you represented a lot of major Fortune 500 companies. Give my listeners some examples, whatever you feel comfortable with, as to how, in what kind of situations you applied tactical empathy and how it served you as well as your clients.
Sure. How about I give you two, a small one and a big one. For the longest time, I had a colleague with whom I had to work. And we were roughly equal on the corporate rung, okay? But this colleague, whom I will not name, was extremely difficult to deal with because he believed, listen, I'm a smartass too, so I totally get it. But he believed that it was really important to take every opportunity to make himself appear to be the most valuable member of the team, which we've all had it happen to us in the corporate world before, and took every opportunity to either belittle someone else's idea or take credit for the idea they just expressed a minute ago, or one up them somehow, or just be disrespectful or whatever it is. He wasn't unethical, right? He wasn't like slitting throats and burning documents at night. So it wasn't anything that was highly morally objectionable. It was just that sort of typical cutthroat corporate combative competitiveness that you see happening around you, no matter what field you're in. So I had to deal with this individual on a daily basis. We were on the same team. Okay. It's literally like being two pro sports players on the same team. We had to effectuate a result jointly, and yet also wanted to be recognized for my work. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It doesn't make me arrogant, despite what this colleague might have said. It doesn't make me self-obsessed. I just want to get my recognition for the work that I'm doing. So what I came to understand about this individual was, first, that he was extremely religious. Once I understood his faith, I could converse with him about things in a very different way than I could before I understood his faith. And I don't mean that I went to him and said, "Walk what Jesus said." I would never do that. But rather, in a respectful and appropriate way, I was able to shape and direct my conversations around faith. I could sprinkle in the language. I could talk about an instance of religious freedom that I observed in this country that I treasured. I could talk about a service I attended that I thought was really interesting. I could ask a question about the Bible. It's not my faith, but at the same time, I could show genuine interest in something that was so important to this person's moral worth. And it made it more difficult for them to now one-up me in a meeting, because now they're connected to me. So even though I'm maintaining my distance, my emotional distance here, because I don't trust this person yet for really good reason, right? I'm maintaining my emotional distance. They're connecting with me and they're feeling emotional empathy toward me. And that change, that shift, although very slight, did improve our working relationship substantially. This person would never be my first choice. And no, we didn't become best friends and braid each other's hair and watch American Idol together. But we were able to get through this case. And I was able to get through this case and survive it and actually end up making a sort of a colleague friend. I understood him and what makes him tick and what was justice to him and what was appropriate to him. I also understood, whether I agree with it or not, the pressures of being the breadwinner that were on him and placed upon him by his family, by his community, by his church, whatever it might be, right? And that understanding, even if it just leads to a joke or two in the break room that we could both laugh at, is a point of connection. So I was able to utilize my knowledge of this individual in order to understand them better while maintaining my emotional distance, yet building a relationship. And I'll tell you, Selma, I swear, by the time we finished that case, listen, again, I wasn't all the way here in terms of being emotionally connected, but I wasn't all the way here either. I was coming along. I was starting to appreciate and see things about this person on an emotional level that there's no way I could have a few months ago, and maybe even learn a thing or two from him. Hopefully he learned as much from me. But again, I was too smart to jump in, right? I'm comfortable with this. We're going to keep it at this. It's right. So this is a good spot for a work colleague who started out as a hostile factor in my work. So that's my small example. My big example is one time I was in the middle of a negotiation with a mediator, and it turns out the mediator is doing all kind of work, paid work in other matters for the opposing side, which is something he should have disclosed, right? Hey, I make what, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year from your opponent giving me other work. So I feel like that's something we should have been told we weren't. And my partner just exploded in the middle. It was a multi-day negotiation. I think we were on day 3. He just started accusing the mediator of being unethical and of being biased. And the mediator immediately got extremely defensive because he had somehow justified it in his own brain. He wasn't trying to one-up us. He was just perfectly fine being rationally objective in this situation, although we might have felt otherwise. So he gets really upset. He starts to storm out. We're day 3 in a 5-day negotiation. If we have any hope of this thing resolving, we need to get that mediator to come back in the room. And we also need to get my partner to calm down. This is really interesting. In a work context, you never touch people, right? It's a little strange, except for a handshake. But I actually went up to the mediator, physically stood, not in a threatening way, but I physically stood between him and the door. And I very gently just touched his upper arm. I said, please stay. Let's discuss. And then I looked him in the eyes and I said, imagine if we could get this resolved. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to trigger for him the difference between explosive mediation. When everyone found out about a potential conflict, he left the room, his reputation is impacted, versus taking an explosive mediation and converting it into a successful one. So I'm trying to get him to go through that mental analysis and then meanwhile go and grab my partner and come back. I will tell you, he may have been biased before, but he wasn't after. He was bending over backwards to accommodate us, and the matter settled very favorably after, not entirely after the 5th day. We ended up having a couple follow-up calls, but by the next week, the matter was settled. And that I thought was a really great example of using wanted touch. There's a big difference between unwanted touch and wanted touch. And just because you want to touch someone, it doesn't make it wanted touch, okay? Wanted touch means it has to be welcomed by the person receiving it. But I feel if you are an empathetic person, you can tell when a touch can be comforting, and you can tell when it will be threatening or harassing. Or at least as you go toward them, if they go back, you can also pull back, right? You can respond to their response because you're reading not just their words, but also their body language and their tone and the way they respond. And if, as I go toward him, I calm my tone and mirror a tone, I'm just helping him reduce his heart rate. I'm helping him reduce the activity in his amygdala, all of which he's doing, right? I'm not reducing his heart rate. And I'm helping him take the edge off a little bit so that he can, the cognitive aspects of his brain can focus better on what rationally makes sense in this situation. Because it is not rational at this point for him to walk out. And by the way, if it's ever rational for somebody to walk out, they should walk out. I'm not against walking out in a negotiation, right? All I'm saying is you need to be able to judge the situation for what it is.
In those kind of situations, and I think across all walks of life, conflict happens and we need to resolve those kind of situations. Instead of going from 0 to 60 and joining in on the drama, how did you keep calm? What techniques do you use for yourself or that you advise others so that you can stay calm and focused and try to basically look at the whole picture and fix it?
So the first thing I'll say is I'm not always successful, right? One of the ways in which I learned to do this is through failure, through being overwhelmed. And calm isn't just necessary when we're faced with drama or aggression or hostility. It's also necessary when we're faced with unserving anxiety or fear or sorrow, right? I know people who can be so overwhelmed by their sorrow. It's not that they're not entitled to being sad. It's that they're so overwhelmed by their sorrow that the emotion is no longer serving them. It is harming them and the people they're responsible for. Right? And so what you learn is you learn about, remember that space we talked about between stimuli and response, that space? You can find ways of objectively extending the space by taking a breath. We give little children a timeout, and yet we forget to give ourselves a single beat, a single breath before we respond. When you sense your blood pressure rising, your muscles tensing up, anger coming up, that's it. One beat. You're entitled to that beat. But here's the really incredible thing. In that moment where everything slows down and you're able to be rational in the situation, in that moment of objective time that you created, so much is happening. So much is happening. You're reducing your heart rate. You're bringing down your sweat levels. You are relaxing the tension of your muscles. And the more practiced you are at yoga or at meditation or at these types of skill sets, the better you are at controlling your heart rate and controlling your blood pressure and controlling your breathing and controlling your anger so that you're not explosive. And this really cool thing happens. The more you do this, the less you need the objectives. The more you do this, the more instinctual it really becomes. And I'll give you an example. I was a few years ago in the middle of mothering my young children, and my kids were really young. The oldest were 3. They were twins. And I received some very traumatic news. And I knew that if I behaved traumatically in response to this horrible news, I also knew that my children had to be told the truth. I had learned this, you see, as a child in Iran from my own parents. And immediately, within a split second, I could react calmly because there was so much pressure on me to protect my little ones. So it is that thing that we can all do. We've all done it. We've all been there. We all have a story like that, right? Where we found something out, but we were responsible for a team, for a group of people. And in a work context, maybe I lost a major client, maybe whatever it is, right? Now there's people whose jobs depend on me, whose insurance depends on me, whose child's insurance depends on me, right? And how I behave and how I react in this moment. That's a lot of pressure. It can destroy me and rip me up. Or I can allow it to give me the strength I need to be able to control and regulate myself at that moment. And we have all done it, and we have all done it in a split second. Not every time, obviously, not every time we've been triggered, but we have an example or two that we can think of. We've been there. So all I'm talking about is taking that skill set, which most people already have, being intentional about it, understanding it, and then starting to apply it in these other circumstances where maybe it's not automatic yet. Maybe it's not instinctual yet. But you'll get yourself there because you know you're capable because you've done it before.
That is excellent. And it's a topic that I frequently talk about, and I have discussed it in other podcast episodes where it's those very same things, whether it's you get bad news or you're in a heated argument or you're in a moment of having a panic attack. It's that moment where you have to, what I call it is tap your own shoulder and stop yourself, not from doing something or saying something, but basically taking that moment, taking advantage of that 1 second. Sometimes it's just 1 second. Stop and basically calm yourself so that you can make the next, hopefully, logical decision.
Yeah.
These, some of the things that you teach your students, or what other topics do you talk about that help them in terms of negotiation and leadership?
By the way, I love the tap your shoulder reference, like a pattern interruption. I love that. So I do teach a negotiating with tactical empathy class that involves a substantial aspect of Stoicism as well. It's actually a workshop. So I get the kids, they're not kids, they're in their 20s and 30s, sometimes even older. I get them for a weekend and we get to have what's called a power workshop at the law school where I get them for 3 hours on a Friday and then 5 hours on a Sunday. And by the end of it, you think they're going to hate you, but actually you're bonded and you're so close to each other. I actually really love those intensive periods of time, the students, and you get to practice the skills, the negotiation skills. And then you get to actually practice the tools of empathy. Okay, now I'm going to retry this negotiation mindful of these 3 tools. Now that I'm mindful of them and I'm utilizing them, how much has my negotiation skill improved? But I also teach a global transactions class, global transactions and regulation. And I actually wrote a textbook in that area as well. It was a large component of my practice, was a global practice. And especially because of the global nature of my practice, the global nature of my upbringing, I am very fascinated by the corporate and the business world in the global context. Also, I very much enjoy knowing about macro global economics and the ways in which, say, trade influence, say, national security, or the ways in which aid, say, influences for investments in agriculture, right? So these things are very fascinating to me because they allow me to see the world on a slightly bigger scale, which allows me to better advise my clients as they make these big decisions in foreign markets, because I have this sort of bigger understanding. So this class, I actually think it's a super fun class, but it's not an intensive class on any particular subject. So I don't do a whole class on employment law or a whole class on intellectual property law or a whole class on tax law, but it's rather one session on tax law, one session on intellectual property law, and international, right? Like, here's the main difference between Europe, States, and Canada, and here's what it's like to work cross-Atlantic, right? And it's really enjoyable. And for that class, my students are MSL students. They're Masters of Science and Law students. So a lot of them are already working professionals, and it is an online class. So I've got students calling it. I had one time somebody from Azerbaijan. I've had people from Asia at 3:00 in the morning, their time, tuning into the class. And so we get to have their global perspective, which is such a gift to the classroom. I genuinely love teaching it. I also teach just a couple of litigation type typical law school courses. I help Judge Harjani, a local judge here, teach his federal civil procedure class. But I always bring stoic empathy into it. So if I'm teaching a class on how to take a deposition, I'm teaching stoic empathy. If I teach a class on how to negotiate, I'm teaching stoic empathy. So it's like this sort of universal. If I'm teaching global transactions, I'm teaching cross-cultural stoic empathy. So that is it's a little bit more challenging because it requires you to have a different level of awareness of the people around you. But I love it.
I'm so overwhelmed with all that you do. You're an author. As I was saying earlier in the podcast, you're an author. You are a TEDx producer. You are a professor. You're so many things. And how do you juggle successful career with your family life? It's always challenging between the boundaries of taking care of patients and then taking care of my own family. What does that look like for you? And what would you advise women to? There was a previous podcast that I did where we decided balance was not the right word, but more like equilibrating. How do you equilibrate your personal and professional life so that you can spend equal amounts of time for both? Because you're only one person, but you do so much.
So I took my kids to Colombia for winter break this year so we could paraglide off the Andes. And we went paragliding off the Andes. My daughter landed in a field of daffodils. And it's so zebra. She lands in this field of daffodils. I landed in a field of rocks and cow poop. So I landed I got to jump off with my kids. How weird and cool and exciting is that? And the view was extraordinary, and the fear and the overcoming it. Sometimes you got it's not in your control where you land. And so I think for me, a lot of it is those times when I fall flat on my face is first remembering there's only so much I can control. And those things that are out of my control, I need to start to release and try to exercise the control that I do have. So for instance, let's say I'm in a moment where I am promoting my book, like right now, and I'm on a press tour, like right now, and I'm doing 3-4 podcasts or interviews a day, and it's extremely intellectually and emotionally demanding. I might see my kids a little bit less. I might not be able to make pickup every day. But when I do see them, I can try to be extremely present for them. I can try to create what I call resting, smiling mom face for them. And that's not to say I ever hide the truth. If I'm stressed, I discuss it with them. If I'm sad, I discuss it with them. I also discuss with them how I'm coping with my stress, how I'm coping with my sorrow, or how their embrace is helping with my sorrow. The reality is that quality of that interaction can be so much more impactful than me just being in the same house as the kids while I watch TV and they watch TV or play video games in a different room. So but I don't want to say quantity doesn't matter, because it does. I think especially with teenagers, they really need you to just be around. They need you to just be around so that the minute they decide they do want you, you're available. That's the thing with teens. Because little kids, they want you all the time. So whatever you can give them, they'll take. But the older ones, like about a 15th of the time, they want you. The rest of the time, they don't. But that 15th of the time, they don't just want you. They need you. And they don't need a babysitter. They need you. And there's actually something really cool and extraordinary about that. And so I tried to shift my work as the kids got older to be more remote. And that is a freedom and flexibility that I had that a lot of other people do not have. So what can they do? They can just, when they are home, be more present. Try to be in the physical space with them as much as possible. And then also incorporate your kids into your activities. Incorporate my kids into everything. My kids are with me on set when I'm producing TED Talks. My kids are with me backstage. My kids are with me as much as we can do it without it interfering with their education, because their education is primary. But my kids are with me when I protest. When I write something, I'll have my eldest daughter proofread it, infusing them into my life, so that it's not mom life, work life, friend life, but rather trying, I like your word equilibrium. I also like the word infusion, right? This kind of infusion of things, because this is the world we live in now. Your child can call you from school on FaceTime if they really need to talk to you. It's a different world. That didn't exist not too long ago. Not only did we not have FaceTime, but it also was not permissible for your child to call you while you're at work without you suffering some sort of penalty. Nowadays, unless it's extreme and you're not able to get your work done, it's perfectly acceptable for something like that to happen. It's also perfectly acceptable for you to step out for a doctor's appointment and come back if you really need to. So there's this infusion. And then also we answer emails when we're with our kids, which bad in some ways because you need to be focused on them. But in other ways, because you don't have to be at the office today, because when that email comes in, you can respond to it, as long as you're present when you're supposed to be present. So I think this sort of intermingling of the different lives together, especially with today's youth, I always say about teenagers, actually learned from my other sister, not the one who works in refugee camps, but the one who's a teacher. She's a high school teacher. And she says, man, teenagers are jerks. You know what? They read poetry and they understand politics and they have ideas that no one has thought of yet. So intellectually fascinated by the kids she teaches. Not because they're perfect little angels, because they're fascinating creatures that contribute to the world in their own way and have a different kind of sophistication, right? They understand digital interaction. They understand AI. They understand things that we don't understand. And so allowing their understanding and not snickering at it, but allowing their understanding to enrich us, I really think goes a long way toward them allowing our understanding to enrich them and helping to find that balance, especially as teens. But I think that overall, you can actually maintain a peaceful home that is that space of healing that I had when I came home when I was younger. And it doesn't mean it's always perfect. Doesn't mean there's never a fight or an argument. It doesn't mean you never lose your cool. Doesn't mean any of those things. I actually think the right standard is, how do I make sure my child feels valued when they're with me? The best way to do that is to actually value them when they're with, like actively value them. The way if you're practicing mindfulness, you might actually think about the cereal as you're pouring it from the box, or you might actually think about the water hitting your skin in the shower as it's hitting your skin. I can actually think about my child's value as I'm speaking with them, or the ideas that they have, or the cool things that they say, or the weird things that they do, or the gross things that they, any of it, right? Even if it's just not my style and not my taste, or not my cup of tea. There's a kind of a charm and a magic about getting to be a part of that. And I really think they sense it. And then when you do get exhausted and need a break, I think they can be more empathetic as well. When you're like, okay, I need to just leave the house tonight. I'm sorry. I can't anymore.
I think if we try our best not to snicker at their language.
Oh my God. My kids gave me a quiz, me and my husband, to see who knew the most amount of Alpha Gen and Gen Z language
Right.
words. And the winner of the quiz got a shoulder up from the kids. But I'm a writer, so I'm always talk to my kids about precision with language. Precision is extremely important to me. So I'm also an extremely annoying mom. So it's no, you don't hate this. How do you actually feel about it? I really hate it. You don't really hate it. That's not what hate is. How do you actually? I strongly dislike it. Okay. Why? It's pungent. I said, okay. Then you say, this is pungent. You don't say, I hate it. And so we have these discussions all the time, and I'm sure I drive them cuckoo bananas with.
Share. I think all moms that try their best are super moms, but you are definitely a superstar.
The best.
You only have to Google your name and all sorts of stuff comes up. So my listeners can easily find you and all the fascinating stuff that you do. But for the purposes of the show, where can my listeners find you and learn more about you?
Thank you so much for asking that. So I have this really impossible to pronounce and impossible to spell name, and I decided to make that my website because that was a good marketing tool on my end. Hey, how about you make your website an impossible to pronounce and to spell website? It is www.shermincruz.com. www.shermincruz.com, my name. You guys, if you're listening to this or if you're watching this on Soma's show, it's spelled out for you at the bottom there. The other thing you can do is just go on Google. Don't even Google me. Google Stoic Empathy. First of all, I promise I'll pop up. Second of all, buy the book. It's everywhere. You can get it at Amazon, Target, Thrift Books. If you have a local bookstore that you love, please ask your bookstore for it. They'll order it for you and they'll get it in. And it would be an absolute honor and pleasure to join you guys in your living rooms, in your cars, in your bathrooms, wherever it is you consume audiobooks or books, with you and your kids, and be able to contribute even just a little bit to helping you advance and increase your power in this ever-changing, crazy world where, as Soma says, we just need to tap ourselves out every once in a while.